Um, so we are live on Facebook, by the way. So keep that in mind. I'll start off by saying welcome to everybody who's online. Everybody can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. So welcome to all of those who joined us so far. I know individuals will begin to start to trickle in. But we wanted to invite you all to have this necessary conversation as one scholarship cohort combined, just to have put this discussion in the air and have everyone be able to share. This is definitely I'll make it known that this is a safe space. Questions, answers. I want to also just put out the disclaimer that of course all the thoughts and discussions and the notes that we will be discussing here are individual thoughts and ideals. They're not a representation of Gates or UNCF or any partner organization by any means. So I definitely want to put that disclaimer out there. But I definitely want to thank you all going into this weekend. Of course, this will probably be one of the last working days for a lot of us. So I wanted to get it in. That way we can have time to share and talk about, what's really been going on in the country as far as how we're interacting as different races that are, in one big melting pot. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce our panelists for this discussion about race. So Sharon, I'll let you go ahead and start.
I am Sharon Washington from the GMS cohort of 2003, and I am a founding member of the GMS Alumni Association. I served as the third president of the GMS Alumni Association. I taught at Temple University for 3 years in the College of Public Health, and for the last year and almost a half, I've been an independent diversity, equity, and anti-racism consultant, working largely with healthcare-related organizations and agencies, but also corporations and nonprofits around the country.
Awesome. Okay, Cory.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Cory Hardiman. I am GMS cohort class of 2010. I was very active with GMS as a student at Morehouse College, where I obtained my bachelor's degree in political science. So while at Morehouse, I served as campus-based leader, and I actually had the pleasure of going to 3 conferences during my time as a GMS scholar. So the freshman conference that they have in Virginia, I was able to go 3 times, welcoming me in the Spell House, as well as Clark Atlanta University students into the GMS family. I currently professionally work as a director at Epic High School on the southeast side of Chicago. I serve as the director of college and career pathways and alumni counseling, and I am very active with the GMS family. It's like all the time we always connected, and one of the things I love about the GMS program is that it's more than a scholarship, it's a family.
Awesome. And then last but not least, Austin.
And so my name is Semyon Austin Evans. I am from the GMS cohort from 2015, and currently a graduate of Texas A&M University, and I am a policy consultant currently in Washington, D.C. And also in conjunction with that, I am an app developer doing UX and UI design also. And so for me, GMS has just been a big blessing to me as far as just being somewhere where I can grow exponentially and use education to flip my situation. And so definitely can speak to a lot of systematic things that I've dealt with and that the Gates Millennium Scholarship has helped me overcome.
Great intros, guys. So once again, we love GMS. Thank you for tuning in, guys, and we'll just go ahead and get started. And Sharon, I'm going to pose this first question to you, and it's very, very general, but it will definitely kick the conversation off. And I just simply want to ask you, what are your current feelings in regarding the current state of this country with everything that's going on, from police shootings to the to just blatant racism, the Karens that are popping up all over social media? Just what are your feelings towards it?
So, well, first, I think I want to frame that while we are having this conversation in the context of COVID and COVID's disparities that reflect the communities that we as Gates Millennium Scholars come from and represent, and we're largely talking about police brutality and racism, but I just want to kind of acknowledge that we're a group of Black folks, rightfully so at the center of this conversation, but I just also want to name that our Native and Indigenous brothers and sisters are very much targeted by the systems of racism and oppression, the disparate outcomes in COVID deaths, as well as positive tests. So I just would like to, name the reality that Native and Indigenous populations are extremely and disproportionately burdened by COVID and by police brutality and mass incarceration and missing women and girls. And so I just would like to invite that awareness into the conversation. But given that, I would say I feel a wide array of emotions. I feel a kind of fatigue that extends beyond my lifetime, and I feel the fatigue of over 400 years of disparities and state-sanctioned violence, and seeking to be resilient, seeking to be heard, fighting for basic access to human rights and civil rights. But I also feel a little bit, I wouldn't go as far as to say optimism, but I do feel some appreciation that with all of the generations of resistance, all of the generations of death and sacrifice that have had to lead us to where we are today, and including the losses, the taking of Black and brown lives, that have really sort of spurred the current uprisings. I think that we've reached a point where more of the dominant group are accepting that this racism that is systemic, that is leveraging state-sanctioned violence is real. More and more people of dominant identities are seeking opportunities to grow in their awareness and grow in their active allyship. So I would be remiss to not name that I do feel some gratitude that more of that is happening. But that also largely lands on, my own personal deeper level of anxiety and stress and bouts of depression and fatigue, honestly, as a vessel of not only my own life spirit, but of my ancestors. I'm, frankly tired of this shit. So, but I'm also glad that more people are taking up their own agency to do something about it in their lives. And so I'm happy that that's happening.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm actually going to pose the same question to you, Austin. How are you feeling right now?
So for me, just to, I guess, add in addition to what Sharon was saying, definitely from my perspective, I think I look at the country now somewhat in a healthy state, which is an interesting point of view. And I say a healthy state from the fact of the allyship that we're seeing. We're seeing in the state of the country now, more than ever, I feel like white and Black Americans and Americans from other cultures are able to come together for a common cause. And I have, due to the state, I've had people who are definitely have different political views than I are picking up the phone and calling me and asking me, what are the issues that I face? What are things that I see? How can they help? And I think that that's showing me that it's definitely, we're in a progressive state of mind right now. And I think that that's very powerful. And so the state of the union for me now, wear your mask for sure, but from a health perspective, but from a American State of the Union perspective, I truly just believe that we're in a healthy place as far as moving towards where we need to go. I don't think we're there. Well, of course, we're not there yet, but healthy as far as the allyship growing.
Awesome. And Cory, I'm going to take you in the same limelight, but I want you to get a little bit more specific. In your own opinion, everything that we've, already discussed so far, what do you feel as though is kind of the biggest plight right now for people of color?
My perspective around it for people of color, Austin, thank you for your perspective around the allyship, but just as I would call it on the block, the reality is that we have a street at Morehouse called Brown Street. And on this street, we kind of talk about some of the most controversial topics in the country and what's plaguing the Black male as well as the Black woman. And one of the things right now that's really mind-boggling to me is the continued racism in our country and the blatant racism that's taking place simply because, thank God for the Gates Millennium Scholarship Program. We all have some of us have multiple degrees and have our PhDs and other external degrees. However, as we climb higher in certain positions, we often see and find ourselves in this box where when we were in college and we had the mindset of saying, okay, let's fight for this, let's make this change, let's make this happen. And then you get into certain perspectives and jobs, and you pretty much become boxed in because you can't be yourself. And one of the things I strive to push my students to do, no matter where you at in life, no matter how many degrees you got, when you see injustice happening that may not be directly happening to you, I always remind them that it's indirectly affecting us all. So when I see what's going on in America right now, I am furious simply because 53 years ago in 1967 in August, it'll be 53 years next month, Dr. King literally had the same title of this discussion we're having, where do we go from here, in Atlanta when he was the president of SNCC. And so I began to look back over that, and I looked at that, and I see that a lot of the issues he spoke about in that particular speech, as far as Black versus pretty much the Black and white and the issues that we face, and the Blackness and being Black, and some people upset with being who they are, but really taking the onus and the ownership of our Blackness and educating our students and others that may not know, but the power behind your Blackness and the fight that comes with it. 53 years later, we still fighting for equity. We still fighting for equality within the Black community so that our voices are heard and our voices are heard. And also we have not only a seat at the table, but action items on the table, making progress to where we going next.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And it is crazy, sometimes you just think, well, personally for me, you just watch CNN, you watch all of the coverage, and it's almost like we're still talking about this. This is still a conversation, where, you see some signs of even white folks that come on and they'll say, I did this 60 years ago. Why am I out here marching again with the same signs, marching for the same things, as if America has been in a standstill? So I completely agree with those sentiments. And I want to pose this next question to you, Sharon. I know there's been a lot of discussion, as in regards to police reform. So I wanted to ask you, what does that process look from your viewpoint? Because a lot of people, they may think we want to just pull all the money from police, or a lot of individuals may think we want to just get rid of police as a whole. So what does that process for police reform look like for you?
Mm-hmm. So I would say there's some key elements to that process that I think are important. And of course, the process that should happen needs to be informed by each respective community in which police departments are housed, because what's needed in Atlanta might be very different from what's needed in Detroit, from the Bronx, etc. But I think one important element is defunding the police in such a way that I saw a recent report that on average, about 4% of police time is spent responding to violent crimes. Maybe around 25% of their time is spent responding to property crimes. But then a large percent of their time is spent responding to mental health issues and, other kinds of civic issues that could be responded to by social workers and mental health professionals. And so I believe that we need to reallocate proportionate to the amount of time that they're spending doing things outside of their job description, outside of their training, to the people who are trained and oftentimes underfunded to be able to respond to those kinds of crises and de-escalate, provide people with services, and really remove the police or have the police have a backup role in having first responders who are well trained in mental health care and social services. So I think that's one important piece that's probably pretty universally needed in most cities, especially cities with large demographics of people of color. I think that there also needs to be a reconsideration, restructuring of the training of police. On average, police are only trained for between like a number of weeks and up to 6 months. On average, the de-escalation training is about 8 hours of de-escalation training compared to over 50 hours of gun use, you know, and shooting training. And so I think that this culture of the militarization of our police needs to be disarmed. I think that treating the police force as though they are at war in the community and our communities are at war, and they're being not only mentally and socially acclimated to a war type environment, but there are sometimes, you know, former military personnel who, when they leave the military, get hired into police force. And we know that there isn't significant PTSD and trauma informed reintegration of people from the military. So if you're taking them from traumatic experiences around the world and bringing them to Black and brown communities and have this climate of the police at odds with and at war within the community, I think that that's dangerous, especially when they are then largely trained to use guns and to not de-escalate situations. I think that really creating a broader sense of awareness between the relationship of the military industrial complex, which then thrives on a prison industrial complex, such that you have many of the state sanctioned equipment that the military uses is created by low cost to no cost prison labor. And so when you continue to have the largest component of the nation's budget be based on military spending, and then you're using free and low cost labor from prisons to be able to fund and to create the tools and resources for a massive military, it helps to drive an industry of increasingly privatized prisons that is collaborating with states to do things like sign contracts where a state is signing over a prison to a private prison company and signing contracts that they'll keep a certain percentage of their beds filled, like 90% of beds in prisons to 100% of beds in prisons filled. How can you promise how many prison beds you're going to keep filled if you're not then going to have policing quotas, whether formal or informal, where you're hyper policing certain communities that lack the political voice to be able to advocate for themselves. You're stopping and frisking people. You are arresting people for ticketing offenses like having a $10 bag of weed, which should be a ticket, but instead you're arresting people and keeping those beds filled, holding people, basically kidnapping people from their lives and then holding them using the bond system and keeping them incarcerated. And so all of these systems need to be really critically assessed. Communities need to be educated about the ways in which these systems are working against our freedom and our liberation, and how then all of that drives the hyper policing, hyper incarceration of Black and brown communities, and how all of that works together to promote unhealthy, unsafe, and violent communities, not only because of the interactions with the police and the state sanctioned protection that police have when they commit acts of aggression and violence against us, but also the violence that we commit against one another because of legacies and history of deprivation, of lack of investment within our communities, lack of education, lack of adequate housing, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that, you know, defunding the police and redesigning the ways in which police are educated, the ways in which police have to be held accountable to their actions, and that there needs to be independent oversight when police violence takes place. And there's precedent around the world of police forces that are able to regulate, or not even regulate, but really just support communities, to promote safety within communities without killing people, and certainly without killing people without any kind of accountability.
Definitely, definitely. And that's very well stated. And I know, Austin, you are Atlanta resident, and there are a lot of things going on in regards to police matters in Atlanta. So just shed some light. How do you feel about police reform and the possibilities of it?
Okay, I love that. I love that. And I just want to apologize for being so general in my response. But now it's time to dive in. And so I'm from the Atlanta, Georgia area. I grew up in downtown Atlanta in an impoverished community, right off of Boulevard, if anyone's familiar with the Atlanta community. And if you grow up in the inner city of Atlanta, in poverty, you have a 3% chance of making it out. About 60 to 70% of the Atlanta public school district is impoverished. So the numbers are stacked against us. It's only about 80% of the Georgia prison population is about 5 zip codes, where me and my friends live, And so to dive deeper in that, being from Atlanta, I was subject to police brutality. Quick story, it was spring break. I was headed back to College Station, Texas, to go back to Texas A&M for school. Law-abiding citizen, had maybe nothing but a speeding ticket. And I was in a car, and the tag light was broken, and I didn't know. It was my cousin's vehicle. He was in the passenger seat on the front side, and he actually had the tag light in the trunk. But when they pulled me over, they asked for my identification. I ended up having my school ID. I had my school ID because I was literally running around the corner to go to the store, and I just grabbed my stack of cards and must have misplaced it. Well, the officer said, where's your license? I said, oh, I have it. I reached in and said, okay, you can pull me up in the system. No other further conversation was had. They reached into the car and snatched me out of it. And it was a really big situation, all videos and things like that. From that situation, moving forward from a solution base, to answer your question, we created something in Atlanta called the Safe at Home game with LEAD. And so the mission is to empower an at-risk generation to lead and transform their city. And so what we do with the Safe at Home game is we want to create relationships between inner city males, not even just Black males, but just inner city males in general, with the police department. So what we do is we created the Safe at Home game, which is a 7-inning self-regulated baseball game that's played at the local Atlanta Public Schools. And so now these kids are being able to be seen in a humane way. And these police officers are seeing these kids in a different light. And they're seeing that these kids that you're policing in these communities, they laugh and play just like your kids. Through this process, I was able to have a sit-down conversation with the officers who were part of the police brutality with me. And we had a real heartfelt conversation. They left out of that conversation crying, and it was a very emotional situation. And they actually came out to the game to play. And so I know that through having those conversations, uncomfortable conversations, those officers were transformed. I know the officers who come out, now the whole Atlanta Police Department doesn't come out, but most of them do, and it's about 20 officers, and they're there. And those officers have kind of turned into brothers for those young kids. And now I hear stories all the time of the young kids, they've been pulled over and they run into one of the officers from the game. And that interaction is so different because now they feel like they're talking to their brother, or they're talking to a family member more so than just being a police officer. And so I believe that from inner city males in Atlanta, it has to be a psychological thing. And that psychological thing, as far as looking at the police as an ally, comes when you create those things like the Safe at Home game and things like that, just creating those positive relationships in those communities. And I think that that's how we move a step forward in inner city male relations to the police officers.
Okay, and Cory, I know you're on the south side of Chicago, so I definitely want you to weigh in on this as well. And I just also, guys, I got a question that just came through since we're talking about police reform. How do any of you all feel about abolishing the police rather than reforming the police? So Cory, I'll turn it over to you.
So yes, this is a deep topic because I've taken some criticism in the city for some time now. So in Chicago, if anyone pays attention to any of the news here, that was a big thing with our Chicago Public Schools School Board recently, where they voted to retain Chicago police officers within the Chicago Public Schools, which is a $33 million contract to retain them in the schools. I am opposed to Chicago police being in Chicago Public Schools, in which I received a lot of feedback from administrators and different people around their perspective on why they feel that police should be in our schools. As you mentioned, I am living on the south side of Chicago, grew up on the south side of Chicago, attended an inner city high school where we had resource officers in the school. However, I do not feel the need of over policing Black and brown bodies, simply because we are humans too. And until you put resource officers in schools where school shootings take place more frequently, and then you place resource officer in inner city schools, most of the times I personally feel that resource officers are placed in schools solely because of the socioeconomic status of students. And when you look at the data, you will actually see that backed up, simply because mostly inner city schools have resource officers in them to, quote unquote, keep the school safe. I feel that a school is safe when they have a fearless leader that leads the school with a mindset of understanding that you are educating Black and brown children that come from impoverished homes, who also come to this place as a safe haven. But more of a place as a safe haven is not for someone with a badge and a gun, but a place where leaders believe in them. And when we believe in our students, the way they act, the way they react, it shows. So for the past 7 years, I've been doing an alternative spring break that was inspired by GMS in the Chicago Public Schools with my nonprofit Hope Dealers. So basically, I bring young men from Morehouse College to Chicago to mentor students on the south and west sides of Chicago. And I'll never forget, I'm going to share this one sentiment. I'll never forget, we was at a high school on the south side. And we refer to ourselves as Hope Dealers. One of my Hope Dealers asked, Cory, you going to address this young man that's sagging? And I said, no, I'm not going to address him, because when we walk through this school and by the time we leave, he will address himself, because he see a model in front of him. I kid you all not. By the time we made it to the auditorium, that same young man came in the auditorium, had a question, pulled his pants up without anyone telling him to pull up his pants, because he seen a group of Black men in this school that's mentoring them. He pulled up his pants. He asked one of the most brilliant questions in the room, in a complete question without error. And when we go back to the hotel with my guys, they was like, man, you right. If they see it, they become it. But if they don't see it, they can't become it. So that's one of the things that I always argue when people say we need police in school. We don't need police in school. We need leaders that want to lead with intentional conversations and knowing the student population that you are serving. Yes, crime is high in our areas. Yes, things happen. But at the end of the day, they take you back to the movie of Lean on Me, when Joe Clark said, if you treat someone like an animal, they'll act like one.
For sure. And that's that. And I like that. I like that analogy, because, all across this country, you see, it's almost like they're policing us sometimes in their minds before they even meet us for the first time. So they practice it in their minds. They already know how it's going to go. They're not going to talk to us like citizens. They're going to talk to us like the animals that you mentioned. So I definitely thank you for sharing that sentiment. And I want to kind of stay around the same kind of thing, but it is kind of different. So I want to ask, and Sharon, I'll start with you. We're starting to see a lot of statues across the country being taken down. All across the country, we've seen not even just statues, but just any type of historical artifact from the 1800s or so. The last thing that I just saw was they removed the whipping post in Delaware. So with all that going on, and some of that has been voluntary and some of that has been involuntary, what type of message is that sending?
I think that it's sending an important message to Black folks that this constant exposure to symbols of our oppression, of our murdering, our rape, our maiming, that is no longer going to be projected into our face and accepted as normal within the communities that we inhabit and that we pay taxes for, which I think is important psychologically for a collective of people who have post-traumatic slave syndrome. I mean, collectively, we have legacies of trauma that have gone largely, if not entirely, unresolved. There has never been a time in American history that Black people have been systematically supported in reconnecting our families, building, stronger and healthier relationships, getting access to mental health and social support services without cost, to restore the significant trauma and intergenerational trauma of slavery and subjugation and dehumanization and Jim Crow and lynch law. And so to have symbols that you can stumble upon in a neighborhood that remind you of the state-sanctioned violence against your people, the dehumanization of your people, the 3/5 compromise that sacrificed your humanity, and how that's continuously normalized, I think it's very important to the psychology and collective psychology of Black people. I think it's also an important indicator to white folks that the history that they have been taught and the framing of our collective history has been distorted. And I think it's an important signifier. And I'm noticing with lots of white groups that I consult with that they're like sidelined by this. They're so shocked and they're confused because so much of the entire process of their socialization has been wrought with lies and a misconstrued perspective of their position in society, the positionality of their ancestors, and of us. I'm reading a report on white attitudes towards Black folks that was published in the 60s. And in 1944, 85% of white folks believed that Black people had the same educational opportunities as white people. In 1944, like well before civil rights, before the Clark-Dall study. I mean, during segregation and Jim Crow, that, this vast majority of white people thought we were living with the same circumstances as them, but just over there. And so the fact that all of us up till 2015, 2017 required a billionaire to gift us with the opportunity to education in order to oftentimes be the first in our family to go to college. It took a gift and a miracle in the lives of 10,000 Black and brown people to get access to education, right? So I think that committing to shifting the narrative of what is acceptable and the history that we want to teach our grandchildren. We can replace every single one of those statues with an abolitionist from that time, with a civil rights leader from that time or since, with an enslaved African person who facilitated somebody's healing or uprising. So it's not as though we don't want to be connected to history, but I think it's important to be connected to the history that reflects the full humanity of every single person.
And take
it away.
Just to add to that, I have a friend of mine. We was having this same discussion, Sharon, and she was like, "We get so caught up in the mainstream of things," and she began a hashtag systems, not symbols. So pretty much saying that it's the system that is, pulling people back from making that progress. It's not the symbol of that statue, although it did some horror to our historic perspective, but we have to disrupt some systems and make sure those systems understand in order for us to make progress, we must disrupt this system and what's taking place, i.e. the commander-in-chief.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that if we take the taking down of these symbols and then move that to a system like education. All of the textbooks that teach us U.S. history should be reflective of this movement of dismantling these symbols of white supremacy, of white dominance, of white violence on Black and brown bodies and indigenous lands. And our textbooks should reflect an accurate, historically, culturally responsive reflection of the diversity of this country and how systems of inequity have come to be. You know, I think that if we take the removing of the statues and apply that to the textbooks, that will have a profound impact on future generations of public school children who will read the textbooks that reflect an accurate history of the United States. I think that moving the symbols to the system of education is a really important one.
Absolutely. And not only that, but also not just a portion, but tell the whole story of our history and not part of the story.
Amen. And so, Austin, I'm gonna pose to you a different question. I know we've had our one-on-one conversations about community. So let's talk about community for a second and the importance of coming together as a community to to be the change that we're seeking so much. So we all want change, and you always hear that it starts with the community. So just talk about the importance of that.
So for me, I feel as though with community, I think the most important thing with change is to not ever stop seeking change. Because in reality, I think that especially with the current state of America, with the videos we're seeing, with the statues being pulled down, we're seeing that, okay, I'll start off by saying this. Now I'm currently a policy intern working as a policy consultant, but before now, I haven't had that luxury to be involved in policy to even understand the complexities of what's going on. I did a poem. I'm also a part of the Posse Foundation. I did a poem that got me that I presented to Deloitte last summer. And it was about the state of my union. And on the poem I started off, it said the topic of the year statement. I said, okay, state of my union. What about the state of my block? Why do I have to walk to school in conjunction with worrying about being shot? They're worried about Trump. We're worried about how we're going to make ends meet. Grinding till the door come off the hinges on the dead end of a back street. And so I say that to say that I think it's a luxury to be able to be involved in policy and understand things like that. But the people in the streets, a lot of them are just infuriated with what's going on. And so they might not understand currently their social impact, and that might a lot due to just the public education system. But they can understand that the powers that be respect that figure, and so that the enrage has led them to tear it down, but that opened eyes. And so I think that from a community perspective, I think that it's just a holistic approach to community, and I think a part of community is understanding and opening your ears and respecting. And also a part of community is being an ally, is not coming to people who may be on their knees at the time on your feet. You need to come at them at a place where everyone can understand. So often you see, and I'm not going to stand up, but so often you see that people are standing up and they're talking like, hey, what do you need, or what is this about? In regards to the statue, you guys, everyone who's on the call now can look at it. We're having a lot of problems right now at Texas A&M with Solomon Ross. Solomon Ross' name in history, in the history books, he's called the Negro Killer, and he's in the middle of our campus. And before I got to this school, and I was doing my new student conference, they were walking around giving me a tour. They said, if you want to get an A on your test, you need to put a penny on Sully to get an A. Okay, so you want me, an African-American student, to come and put my faith and put a penny on someone who's called a Negro Killer, who's been known to hang an absurd amount of African-Americans. And so the community, for me, looks like highlighting the colorful history. I think that's also a part of the community. So at Texas A&M, I was one of the senators who drafted and sponsored a bill for Matthew Gaines. Matthew Gaines was a part of the Moral Land Grant Act to get Texas A&M established. And so a part of community is also highlighting the community, highlighting what's going on in the community, highlighting the things we might not want to see, the uncomfortable conversations. I think that creating that safe space, and also a part of the community is challenging the idea and not the person. You know, I think that's one thing that we all always oversee from a community perspective is he feels that way, so I'm attacking them, but what's the community in that? And so I believe that we have to create these safe spaces and safe environments for people to share what they really feel. Because when you get into these safe spaces and you hear, you know, why someone voted for that person or why they feel that way, a lot of times, and I'll share this story, I think this summarizes it up better than me going on a rant. I had an interaction freshman year in the honors dog at A&M. It was a white male, and we got closer throughout the year. And he sat me down. We were just chilling randomly in the game room. He said, you know, Austin, I want to tell you something. Like, what's up? He said, you know, you're one of the first real Black friends I've ever had, and I appreciate you for it. Like, okay. Then he goes on to say, in my life, I live in a bubble. If I never interact with you, I can be in my bubble and live a great life. Nothing has required me, except being your friend, to step out of that bubble, because that bubble is my safety net. And I have no reason to step out of that bubble, but my love for you has created an empathetic situation for me to want to step out that bubble and help. And I think community should be defined by empathy. You know, I was having a conversation earlier today with some of my other African-American counterparts, and we were talking about the Redskins, the NFL team, you know, and I remember I had a paradigm shift going to my Gates conference my freshman year, and I got a chance to meet Gates Millennium Scholars who are from reservations, and they're telling me about the stories of what they're going through today. I had no clue about that. And as a community member, I have a decision to make. Can I be empathetic to someone who does not look like me? Can I be empathetic to someone who might have a different plight than me? And I think that empathy is a big part of community, and I think that so often is left out. And if some people can just have empathy, yes, I see those kids in cages, and those kids in cages don't look like me, but that's someone's kid in that cage. Can I make a stand for that? You know? Yes, my white ally was not victim of the Negro killer, but as an ally, you understand how having that statue on campus makes me feel. So are you going to be empathetic enough in a community sense to step in with me and stand with me in solidarity to continue? And so I think that that's how I define community. Solidarity and empathy are two of the big key factors in that. And if we can have that, we create a broader community. And I think that's transferable across everything, whether that's education, whether that's defund the police. Sharon, you brought up a great point about, because I literally was just looking at that stat about the percentages of what police are really responding to. 4% violent crimes, 4. You know what I mean? And so if they're a little bit more empathetic, you can open yourself up to new ideas. And that's what community is all about for me.
Definitely. That's well put. That's well put. And you brought up some good points. You actually got me jumped into my next question. So I'm going to move to Cory really quickly to talk about community, but also I want you to kind of jump in and talk about how one can be an educator, or how one can go about talking to those who want to be quote unquote allies.
Yes. Great point made, Austin, around the conversation of community. So one of the things there's a lot of push of allies coming into the move. And one of the things that I participated in the marches that took place here in Chicago. I was there on the front lines fighting. But one of the things I want allies to understand is don't come into a movement and try to destroy things when you know that the plague of most of the stuff that's happening is going to be put on the individuals that's really going through these issues with police brutality. And one of the things I was so disheartened about is that quote unquote white allies that joined the movement about defund police in Chicago, and spray painting BLM, Black Lives Matter, all across the city. And the plight of that is that people look at that and feel like, oh, them black people spray painted all of that, tore all of that down. And I know everyone's seen the looting that took place across communities. That's a whole nother tangent of a conversation around how I feel about that. But if you're going to be an ally, stand up and understand what we're going through and what we're facing, and be open to being educated, because at the end of the day, you are now a black woman or a black man or anyone of color that's facing the brutality of what we're going through. So at the end of the day, be open to our community and having a very vivid and live conversation around our struggles and what's happening. And one of the ways we can do that as leaders in our community is by having those candid conversations, even in the boardroom, having those conversations where they feel like it's a time to joke on what's going on, or give this shady slide pass of what's going on and their undertone, but calling that out and being a person that stand firmly on your community. Because to me, my black is beautiful. And the most beautiful part about my black is being an educated black man, in which a lot of people hate to see, simply because we are educated and we know the nuance of things that go through our community, but also the things that harm our community from a policy perspective. So challenging those who write policy, even the people that look like you, don't be afraid to challenge them, because most of the time it's funny that an ally would stand for a community bigger than a person that was born black in America. And although you feel like you have this privilege of now having access to your quote unquote economic wealth, but also calling them out and understanding that it may not impact you directly, but it's indirectly impacting you. And while it may not be in your house may not be on fire today, but you never know tomorrow what fire may hit it. So at the end of the day, always being in community and understanding what's going on. And when you brought up the point about the kids that's, in cages, because we have a commander-in-chief that feels such a way about someone that's coming into a country that I see as a melting pot of creation that actually created this country, and understanding that and being an educator that educate black and brown students, all of that stuff impacts us deeply, and we have to be the ones to call it out.
Awesome. Sharon, I definitely want to get your input on this, so go right ahead.
Yeah, I think that what does it mean to be an ally, or what does it take? I provide coaching to folks who want to grow in their allyship and anti-racism. And there's a variety of different tools and I think fundamental concepts that people need to embrace. I think one set of those is to listen, receive, and validate. By listening, folks need to practice not talking and being quiet and hearing not only what people are experiencing, but I think seeking out the publications and the recordings of all of the African and indigenous ancestors who have already told white people what we live with. I think increasingly allies that are like, oh, I'm so shocked because my bubble got popped and I see that things are going on. Hey, black friend, can you tell me what you experienced? Hey, black colleague, how are you feeling? Tell me about your suffering. And that in and of itself is its own kind of trauma, and it's annoying. And we don't want to do that oftentimes, especially at work or when we're not having to work and we just want to be a regular human being and we don't want to have to be a mouthpiece to regurgitate our own suffering and our own experiences with racism. So listen to the voices of African ancestors that talked about what it was like to be enslaved. Frederick Douglass told you already what this is like and what this is about and what your ancestors were doing in real time. Read that, right? Do that homework and listen to the voices of Black and Brown people. Listen to what Black and Brown people are saying that we want and that we need. Don't listen to white people on the news who are reiterating their perception or their lens of what Black and Brown people are asking for. Then receive. That means you got to have an open heart, an open mind, quiet your spirit and receive and internalize what we are sharing. Really, before you try to defend yourself or prove that you're a good ally, or defend yourself and prove that you're a good non-racist white person, receive what people are saying. Listen to the suffering that exists in our communities, and really actively look within yourself for all of the ways that you've been socialized into a culture of white supremacy, and into white dominance, and into white privilege, and into white fragility, and then start to do the work of undoing that within yourself. And if you don't know how to do it yourself, seek a professional. It's like, you really shouldn't put it on your friends and your family to be your therapist, and you certainly shouldn't put it on the lives of the people of color that you care about to be your coach. People are here to get paid to help you with that. And then to validate, as people share what they're experiencing, it's really important for allies to validate that. If you're in the office and a person of color says, I just had this microaggression happen, don't try to explain it away. Don't try to think of maybe like a devil's advocate kind of justification platform. Just validate that that experience was hurtful for them, and that you wish that that didn't happen. And ask them if there's something that they would like you to do to take action to support them so that they don't have to. But I think that the process of really taking the time and making the effort to re-educate yourself about the context that we are all living in, the foundation upon which these acts of brutality are happening, and that this COVID data is landing on a field of pre-existing health conditions that we disproportionately bear the burden of. There's information available for people to learn and relearn what we're living with, and I think people need to do that homework. And if the homework is difficult, or if they need help, they need to seek out, the professionals that exist that can help them, and don't burden the people of color in their lives with being their teachers.
Awesome. And that's definitely a word, Sharon. that was a word. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start firing out questions, guys. And if we could keep the questions, answer the questions in as minimal time so we can get as many in. We can keep the short answers maybe to about 20, 30 seconds. And I'll actually start out with the first question that just popped in the chat. Student says, I feel incredibly guilty that the protests in my city have died down. How can we keep the movement alive outside of protests?
I follow Sean King, who is a journalist activist. He's helped to facilitate, getting district attorneys voted into office that are justice oriented. There's a grassroots law project that is working to create some systems for community empowerment around police observation and intervention around brutality. So I would follow him and the different movements that he's helping to lead, because they help you to make calls to legislators and to help amplify the requests of communities to create social justice institutions within cities. So I think that's a very actionable leader that you can tap into and support.
Yeah, and like Sharon just mentioned, that's definitely real. So a lot of times, some of the movements continue to work, but a lot of stuff is behind the scenes, and a lot of people don't see. So one of the groups that I support here in the city of Chicago, I believe in youth voice. When I was younger, I believe that my voice should be heard and not just seen. So I was very actionable about being heard more than being seen and just staying silent. So one of the groups I follow here is Good Kids Mad City, students that's really doing the work and lobbying against things that impact Black and brown students, as well as Black and brown adults that are scared to speak out because they have jobs and they feel like they got to save their pensions and things like that. But these youth are very action oriented, and they are doing great things. And Sean King is a great man that I also follow as well, that's doing actionable work across the U.S. and the world.
And in addition to all those great points, I would say too, make sure you're starting petitions. I think it's easy to retweet and do things like that, but maybe a simple retweet raising awareness. But you see now that petitions, whether it's for Breonna Taylor and these people, and they're saying these say their name movements, are the people, the powers that be are having to pay attention to those. You have 2 million people sign a petition. Elected official has his eyes on that, and they have to address it. And so I would say sign petitions and most of your friends to do the same.
Definitely. And another question I see, Sharon, you kind of answered it in the chat, but we can talk about it really quickly publicly. You know, how can we as GMS scholars in the community, how can we act in our capacity, in this capacity as GMS scholars, to push for the positive change? Just keep on with that.
So yeah, I was just reading through Sharon's comment, and I back that 100% because that's definitely something that needs to take place. And also being able to access, like yourself, Justin, and other people that work at GMS to connect scholars that's interested in this work, because there are a lot of scholars that's doing the work out here on the front lines and across different cities. So being able to build that community amongst GMS.
And I think I put it in there so the attendees can see that answer. So guys, to the answer, how can you as GMS scholars, impact, that answer is right there in the chat. I want to pose this question specifically to Sharon. And this question came in, of course, in the pre-question. What tangible role, the question says, what tangible role do I play in all of this as a woman of color?
I think that we are voices of our communities and the spaces where we are. I think that to the extent that we can leverage allies in our workplaces and other institutions that we embody to speak up so that we don't bear the burden of doing that on our own. I think that we as sisters and mothers serve the function of, like, we are the connection between our past and our present. And I mean that in the sense that at about 5 months of gestation, an infant female or a fetus within the womb that is going to become female grows all of the eggs that she'll ever have. So I had my daughter in my ovary while I was in my mother's uterus developing, right? So we serve as a connection between our past and our present. And so I think, making sure that we're taking good care of ourselves so that we can be healthy sisters, we can be healthy mothers, and that we can be long-term activists for change. But at the same time, recognizing that this work and the burdens that come from society, but also from our intergenerational trauma, really does affect us from inside out and can cause a weathering effect that can take our lives far too soon. So I think, honestly, prioritizing self-care, learning how to ask for help, learning how to set boundaries in our lives and with our allies and with our colleagues is something that's really important. For those of us Black women, Native women, we have higher rates of domestic violence and domestic murder. And so we also have to be very careful about promoting our own protection, collaborating with other sisters to make sure that we are well and that we are taking good care of ourselves and taking care of each other. Because we do serve this integral role, not only in our community holding things together, but also, transferring information from generation to generation. And it's really important that we prioritize in this generation cleansing ourselves of the intergenerational trauma and poverty and harms and various factors that really seek to dismantle our position within society. So I think that those are some important things we have to do.
Awesome. So I know time is of the essence, so I'm going to pose 2 more questions, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. So I see Michelle is on here, and I know you posed a question, so I'm going to read this question for everyone. And Cory, I'll start off with you. So how can we navigate, racism conversations at a PWI? Now that talking about these issues has become more mainstream?
So I will actually move that question to Sharon or Austin, being that they are more familiar with those spaces. So I attended a PWI for my master's program, but I feel like they have more experience around that topic. So I could popcorn it to Sharon or Austin, whoever wants. Go ahead and hit that.
Okay, Sharon, take it away.
So I would start with boundaries. I would only talk about it if you really feel like it. And if you don't feel like it, if that's going to trigger you, I would say that. I think now is the most optimal time that we've probably ever had as a large community, to just be straight up and honest. So I would, more than anything, protect your limits. And so if you feel like having a conversation, go ahead. But if you don't, I would say that. And I would either direct them to read one of these books or go anywhere on the internet where Black people are talking, because they'll tell you. Or don't, because you don't have to. So I think that's an important thing, just recognizing what your boundaries are and honoring those. Don't feel like you have to, or that you owe it to our people to make sure this white person is educated. I also would make sure that the conversations that you do take the time to have are the ones that matter. Collaborate with your peers of color and insist that the dean of this or the president of that meet with you. And that you ask them, what are you all doing to make sure that you are collaborating with our community in an equitable and, you know, inclusive way? How are you recruiting faculty of color, students of color? How are you assessing the needs of students of color and making sure that you institutionally meet those needs or support those needs? How are you making sure that faculty of color have the resources that they need to thrive and they're not being paid differently than their white counterparts, et cetera? You know, so your voice matters, and I would collaborate with others and go talk to the people that can make change. And if you don't feel like having small conversations with people that can look on the internet and find the answers to those questions, you shouldn't feel like you have to, and I wouldn't do it.
And I love that. And just to quickly add in addition to that, with Texas A&M being 66,000 students, only 3% Black, with only 800 Black males, you can kind of feel alone at times. And so I think a big thing on these campuses is, I would urge any minority student coming to a school, especially at Texas A&M, find your safe space, find your community, find your hobby, find your getaway, find people who look like you, find people who may be going through the same plight as you. And I think that definitely helps you finding your support system and finding where your resources lie as far as just you as a student. But moving into just the conversation quickly, I think one thing that people have to understand these PWI campuses, and one thing that we had to really let our administration know is that, like, yes, you can say we're a melting pot, but sometimes when people throw this melting pot on us, they forget that a melting pot, look into a melting pot, everyone looks alike. And that's not exactly the case. I will more so compare our experiences to gumbo, because when you look into that gumbo pot, you have the sausage in there, you got the vegetables, and you can see all these different things sticking out. But when you pick it up and you put your fork in it, or your spoon or whatever you gumbo with, and you take a bite of it, it's tasty, it's good, because all those different unique things come together to create something powerful. And so I would just say, in regards to what Sharon said, just find your allyship on these campuses, find your safe space, and definitely don't let your voice go unheard. Don't let your voice go unheard.
Awesome, guys. Last question. I'm going to challenge you all. I'm going to give you all a 10-second response. Y'all got 10 seconds. 10 seconds, maybe even 15. So we've seen all of these companies and organizations, they're coming with so much overwhelming support towards the African-American community and people of color as a whole. Most recently I saw the NFL is going to play the Negro national anthem now, or they're looking to play it. So out of all of these years that we've seen racism, we've seen the police corruption, we've seen just the generalized hatred for people of color in some sentiments. Why now? So if you could just, tell, these organizations, a few thoughts on your mind, what would you tell them, as far as, why it's taking now for you to actually see, what is actually going on in this country? So Austin, we'll start with you. You're on the clock. You got 15 seconds.
15 seconds. I would say that my friends, I talk about this a lot. I think that the George Floyd video was the straw that broke the camel's back, as far as the world being, as far as one of the videos being, okay, I'm messing that up. Let me not go that route. I'll go this route. I'll say that I think that the injustices are literally so blatant to the point that these corporations cannot ignore them, and they understand now that it's their social responsibility as a corporation to be involved with this. So often social responsibility was environmentalism and all these other things, but now it's Black and brown bodies. And so these companies are starting to see that's a part of social responsibility, so they're stepping up. And we're starting to see the ones who aren't stepping up, and we're seeing that the minority dollar is very powerful, and they understand that also.
Awesome. Cory, you got it.
So yeah, so the thing to me is that, you know, they can say all this stuff. I need to see proof in the pudding, as they would put it.
Thanks.
Show me the new members of your board that you have ousted, the people that have supported this racist bigotry that's been taking place, and show me the new board members that have a justice mindset, who are coming to this institution, coming to these certain businesses to shake things up, and just really move in a way that makes it bigger than just speaking and sound bites for the public.
Awesome. Sharon, the last word is yours.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there's become an increased intolerance for witnessing Black and brown people being murdered on our news feeds. But I think regardless of the why now, I think the what now is moving from, as Cory offered, moving from their statements to doing institutional assessments, to making sure that there is not pay inequities across racial groups and across gender, making sure that Black folks that are working within corporations have the sponsorship and mentorship to be able to move throughout the company and to be promoted, making sure that boards are increasingly diverse, and that barriers to accessing industries that we've been historically deprived of access to are opening up and creating pipeline programs, making sure that corporations are investing into Black businesses and into Black communities specifically and intentionally and on purpose. And I think making sure that corporations are becoming increasingly accountable for the impact that they have on communities through, environmental hazards as well as the economic hazards. And I think making broader, more thoughtful and intentional efforts to invest in Black and brown communities is what I need to see corporations doing now.
Awesome. Guys, this has been a pleasure. Thank you for, being diligent and coming on here and expressing your thoughts. I almost want to say we may have to come through with a part 2 to this. But this was recorded. We were live on Facebook. So to all the attendees that are still here, thank you. If you learned anything from this, please feel free to share. Just each one teach one is what I always like to say. So just spread the wealth. Guys, you got some great information. So just be on the lookout, of course, for upcoming events. And with that, I would say have a blessed weekend, holiday weekend. Stay safe. And I'll see you at the next event, guys. So see you later.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank y'all.
Thank you. And guys, just stay on for me 1 second. We'll wait till the attendees leave.